Okay, welcome back here to wrap up the weekend edition of the Korelin Economics Report with a gentleman who hasn't been on for quite some time. We're talking with John Williams right now. John has, I think, the most sought-after newsletter out there, and it has been in that particular realm for quite some time now. The newsletter is called Shadow Government Statistics, Analysis Behind and Beyond Government Economic Reporting. I've known John personally for quite some time now. I think he's one of the most brilliant men out there. And I wanted to talk with him today about the employment numbers that came out yesterday, Friday. The employment numbers came out showing an unemployment rate of 8.3%. Obviously, the president had a very large grin on his face. The problem is, I don't really put very much credence in those particular numbers. John, what's this all about?
Well, there are a couple of factors at work. One is that we're really not getting good quality monthly numbers in most economic series at the moment. That's due to the nature of the numbers that end up getting seasonally adjusted, where the government tries to take out regular seasonal patterns such as the holiday shopping season or the school year, so that the resulting month-to-month comparisons are really more of an indication of relative economic activity. The seasonal factors usually are stable over time, but we haven't seen stable seasonal factors in a long time because the depth and the length of this severe economic contraction we've been going through has just thrown off the system. It was never designed to handle anything that severe. So to start with, the numbers are not of particularly good quality in terms of the monthly level. The error is much larger than they would normally expect, which is plus or minus 0.2 percentage point.
Yeah.
So that 8.3 could be 8.1, could be 8.5. You're probably closer to plus or minus half a percentage point as they count it. But it's a matter of how you define the unemployment rate. If you went around and asked everyone in the country whether he or she was unemployed, everyone would give you a quick answer. I mean, nobody has to think about that much. They have a pretty good sense as to whether or not they're working. If you tallied that all up, you'd end up with a much higher unemployment rate than the government reports. The reason is the way the government defines the headline number. The government actually reports 6 levels of unemployment. The unemployment level 3 is the one that's the headline number. That's the 8.3%. In order to be counted in that, not only do you have to be out of work, willing and able to take a job, but you have to be actively looking for work. You have to look for work in the last 4 weeks. There are a number of people who, after a while, find that there are no jobs available and they stop looking for work, but they still consider themselves unemployed. And the government, in its surveys, will count them at least for a year as what they call a discouraged worker. This is someone who's given up looking for work. Back before 1994, anyone who met all the other qualifications of being unemployed but had given up looking for work was counted irrespective of how long it had been since they'd looked for a job. 1994, they redefined it so that if you hadn't been looking for more than a year, you were just dropped from the rolls and not counted. That's a substantial number of people. Because of the severe level of the downturn and the protracted nature of it, you have an extraordinarily large number of people who have stopped looking for work, although they would still consider themselves unemployed. They'd take a job if they could get it. They want a job. The effect there is that where the government publishes 6 levels of unemployment, their broadest measure, called U6, includes the discouraged workers who've been discouraged less than a year, plus people who are attached to marginally attached to the workforce, or where they have working part-time for economic reasons. They'd like a full-time job, but they can't get a full-time job. That U6 measures up around 15%. And if you add in the longer-term discouraged workers, those who've been discouraged for more than a year, and I use my own estimates on that because the government no longer publishes it, I'll contend you're up over 22%, around 22.4%. And that's a lot closer to what you'd get if you went around and asked everyone whether or not he or she was unemployed.
Where is the unemployment rate we're talking February numbers here, February 2012, compared to the unemployment rate of, let's say, February 12th, 1935?
keep in mind that the government didn't start surveying unemployment until the 1940s.
Right.
So that the estimates of unemployment during the Great Depression were guesses. They were based on all sorts of samplings ranging from the 1930 census to people who applied for Social Security. The widely accepted estimate I've heard for the worst of the Great Depression, which was 1933, is around 25%.
Yeah.
That's not quite the same thing that I'm looking at, only because the environment has changed so markedly since then. Back in the Great Depression, something like 27% of the population, or those working, were on farms. Today, that's less than 2%. If you look at what they estimated as unemployment in the non-farm sector, which I think is really a closer measure to my number for comparison purposes, that was up around 35%.
Yeah.
So I'm at 22.4 today is my estimate for February. I think a comparable number, the worst of the Great Depression, would be around 35%. It's as bad as it's been since World War II.
Yeah.
But we haven't gotten to the Great Depression levels yet.
Your opening comments on your newsletter is, in this direct quote, the outlook for the broad economy remains bleak, despite relatively upbeat February payroll data. Deterioration in the January trade deficit and related revisions suggest negative impact on the first quarter 2012 GDP reporting, along with increasing downside pressure on the U.S. dollar from underlying economic and political fundamentals. Your numbers show that we're about 13% better in terms of unemployment right now than we were back in the 30s. But my God, 22% is a huge number of people to be unemployed.
The issue here going forward is that we're not about to see an economic recovery.
Yeah.
In order to have an economic recovery, consumers have to somehow see income growth that exceeds the rate of inflation. The big problem right now is the average household can't keep up with inflation. And if income doesn't stay ahead of inflation, there's no way that you can have consumption growth that is faster than inflation, and that's the bulk of GDP. In the past, I mean, this has been an ongoing problem since the 70s, with the various trade policies. The higher paying production jobs have been shifted offshore, and income adjusted for inflation is generally dropped, not only for individuals but for families. Mr. Greenspan started pushing the concept that really people should look at expanding their debt, and that's one way you can buy at least some short-term economic growth is through debt expansion. If you don't have the income growth, people can borrow money to make up for the shortfall in their living standards. We've come to the end of that. That debt growth that Greenspan encouraged has collapsed. The average consumer does not have the ability to make up for any shortfall in his spending the way he'd like to be spending with debt expansion, the way that he used to. I mean, you saw press in the last week about consumer credit outstanding having recovered or nearly recovered the pre-recession high.
Right.
That may be technically correct, but all the growth in consumer credit outstanding has been in the federal student loans.
Yeah.
The lending, the credit cards, and the fixed loans that would be used for consumption of goods and services. That has not grown at all. That is a major problem that's holding back the economy. It's structural. Nothing that's being done to address it. And what you have to keep in mind is that if the economy is not recovering, you look at the official GDP numbers, broadest measure of economic activity. Inflation adjusted, they're now showing a full recovery. We've actually seen the GDP pass its pre-recession high. The only problem is there's no other economic series that is showing that. If that were happening, you'd be seeing that all over the place. Not happening. The GDP is heavily overstated. And going forward, the underlying economic reality is that we're going to see a bottom bouncing economy. It's going to be much weaker than expected. That means the budget deficit's going to be worse. The Treasury funding needs are going to be higher than expected. Banking stress tests are going to be worse than expected. Basically, the Treasury's going to have to borrow a lot more money. It's going to have trouble selling those notes and bonds. Most likely, the Fed's going to come in and act as a lender of last resort. quantitative easing by the Fed is far from over. That'll tend to be very inflationary, very negative for the dollar.
The Korelin Economics Report is produced for A.B. Korelin and Associates. Opinions expressed on this program are intended solely for the entertainment of our listeners, do not constitute investment advice, and are not necessarily those of this network, radio station, or our sponsors. Find out more about this program and today's guests by visiting www.kereport.com. For Al Korelin, this is Colleen Robbins. Join us again next week for the Korelin Economics Report.